Chapter 4, Restrictions on Working Hours of Adults. Section 54, Weekly Hours. Definition. No adult worker shall be allowed or required to work in a factory for more than 48 hours in any week, or, where the factory is seasonal, for more than 50 hours in any week. However, an adult worker in a factory engaged in work which, for technical reasons, must be continuous throughout the day, may work for 56 hours in any week. Elaboration. This section restricts the number of hours an adult worker can work in a factory during a week. The standard limit is 48 hours, but it can extend to 50 hours in the case of seasonal factories. In exceptional cases where continuous work is necessary, the limit can be further extended to 56 hours. Example: in a textile factory in Pakistan, workers are typically scheduled for 48 hours of work per week. However, during peak production seasons, such as Eid, when demand for textiles is high, workers may be required to work up to 50 hours per week. Case study, Weekly Hours, Section 54. Factory type, Food Processing Factory. Scenario: a food processing factory located in Faisalabad, Pakistan, experiences seasonal fluctuations in demand, leading to variations in working hours for its employees. Application of Section 54. The factory abides by Section 54 of the Factory Act, which restricts adult workers from working for more than 48 hours in any week. However, during peak seasons, they extend working hours to a maximum of 50 hours, in line with the Act's provisions for seasonal factories. Compliance. Seasonal scheduling. The factory closely monitors seasonal demands and schedules overtime during peak periods while adhering to the maximum limit of 50 hours per week. Overtime compensation. Workers are compensated for overtime hours worked during these peak seasons, receiving double their regular hourly wages. Benefits and outcomes. Flexibility. Seasonal scheduling allows the factory to adapt to fluctuating demand efficiently. Worker earnings. Overtime compensation ensures that workers are fairly compensated for their extra hours during peak seasons. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 54 could result in legal penalties and harm to worker well-being if excessive hours are consistently required. Section 55, Weekly Holiday. Definition. No adult worker shall be allowed to work in a factory on a Sunday unless certain conditions are met, including providing a holiday either before or after that Sunday, notifying the intention to require work on Sunday to the inspector, and displaying a notice to that effect in the factory. Substitution of holidays is also regulated to ensure workers have sufficient breaks. Elaboration. This section outlines the conditions under which adult workers can be scheduled to work on Sundays. It aims to protect workers' rights by ensuring they receive adequate rest and compensation for working on Sundays. The factory manager must provide notice and follow specific rules for substitution of holidays. Example: in a food processing factory in Pakistan, workers are given Sundays off. However, during the holiday season, if the factory needs to meet increased demand, they can schedule workers on a Sunday but must provide compensatory holidays and follow the notification and substitution rules. Case study, Weekly Holiday, Section 55. Factory type, Textile Factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Lahore, Pakistan, operates continuously. It is essential to ensure that workers receive their weekly holidays as required by labor laws, despite the continuous production process. Application of Section 55. The factory follows Section 55 of the Factory Act, which stipulates that no adult worker shall work on a Sunday unless they have a holiday for a whole day on one of the 3 days immediately before or after that Sunday. Compliance. Regular holiday rotation. The factory management maintains a holiday rotation system, ensuring that workers have at least one whole day off in each 7-day cycle, even when they work on Sundays. Notice to inspector. The factory complies with the Act by delivering a notice to the inspector before requiring workers to work on Sundays and displaying a notice in the factory. Benefits and outcomes. Worker rest. The holiday rotation system provides workers with consistent rest days, contributing to their well-being and job satisfaction. Regulatory compliance. Complying with Section 55 ensures adherence to labor laws and maintains a harmonious workforce. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 55 can result in penalties and strained labor relations due to irregular or inadequate rest days. Section 56. Compensatory holidays. Definition. When workers are deprived of their weekly holidays due to exemptions granted under this Act, they must be provided with compensatory holidays of equal number to the holidays lost. The government can make rules prescribing how these compensatory holidays are to be allowed. Elaboration. This section ensures that workers do not lose their rightful weekly holidays due to exemptions. If they do, they are entitled to compensatory holidays to make up for the lost rest days. The government can specify the rules for granting these compensatory holidays. Example, in a beverage factory in Pakistan, if workers are required to work on their designated weekly holiday to meet a sudden increase in production, they must be given compensatory holidays on other days to make up for the lost rest time. Case study, Compensatory Holidays, Section 56. Factory type, Chemical factory. Scenario, a chemical factory in Karachi, Pakistan, occasionally faces machinery breakdowns or unforeseen issues that disrupt the regular weekly holidays of workers. Application of Section 56. To adhere to Section 56, the factory provides compensatory holidays to workers who lose their regular weekly holidays due to unexpected factory disruptions. Compliance. Record keeping. The factory maintains detailed records of instances where workers' weekly holidays are disrupted due to unforeseen circumstances. Prompt compensation. Workers who miss their weekly holidays are promptly granted compensatory holidays of equal number to the holidays they lost. Benefits and outcomes. Worker fairness. Providing compensatory holidays ensures that workers are not unfairly disadvantaged due to unexpected disruptions. Regulatory compliance. Compliance with Section 56 upholds labor laws and maintains worker morale. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 56 may lead to worker dissatisfaction and potential legal consequences if compensatory holidays are not provided as required. Section 57, Daily Hours. Definition. No adult worker shall be allowed or required to work in a factory for more than 9 hours in any day. However, in seasonal factories, male adult workers may work 10 hours in any day. Elaboration. This section limits the number of hours an adult worker can work in a factory in a single day to ensure their well-being and prevent excessive fatigue. In seasonal factories, male workers have a slightly extended daily limit. Example: in a chemical factory in Pakistan, workers are scheduled for no more than 9 hours of work in a regular day. However, during certain peak seasons, male workers may be required to work up to 10 hours a day. Case study: Daily Hours, Section 57. Factory type: cement factory. Scenario: a cement factory in Islamabad, Pakistan, operates with regular daily shifts for adult workers. However, during peak construction seasons, they sometimes need to extend daily working hours. Application of Section 57. The factory adheres to Section 57 by ensuring that adult workers do not work for more than 9 hours in a regular day. When required, male adult workers may be scheduled for up to 10 hours, as allowed under the Act. Compliance. Standard hours. For the majority of the year, the factory maintains a daily schedule of 9 working hours, with proper breaks. Peak season adaptation. During peak construction seasons, the factory extends the daily working hours for male adult workers to 10 hours, in compliance with the Factory Act. Benefits and outcomes. Efficient operations. The factory can meet increased demand during peak seasons while adhering to legal working hour limits. Worker compensation. Workers are compensated for the extra hour worked, receiving overtime pay in compliance with labor laws. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 57 may lead to legal repercussions and worker dissatisfaction if extended working hours are not adequately compensated. Section 58. Intervals for rest. Definition 1. Periods of work. Periods of work. This term refers to the hours during which adult workers are engaged in their job responsibilities within a factory. Definition 2. Intervals for rest. Intervals for rest. These are designated breaks or pauses during a worker's shift, allowing them to recuperate, relax, and re-energize before continuing their work. Explanation of Section 58. Section 58 of the Factory Act outlines the importance of providing intervals for rest to adult workers during their work hours. It offers 2 main options for fixing these intervals. Option A: in this scenario, no work period should exceed 6 hours, and workers should have an interval for rest of at least 1 hour after every 6-hour period. Option B: alternatively, work periods can be structured so that they do not exceed 5 hours. Workers are then entitled to an interval for rest of at least half an hour after every 5-hour period. If the workday extends to 8 hours, workers must have at least 2 such rest intervals. These provisions aim to ensure that workers are not overburdened with continuous work and are given adequate breaks to maintain their physical and mental well-being. Application in real-world examples. Let's explore how Section 58 is applied in various types of factories in Pakistan. Food processing factory. Scenario: a food processing factory in Lahore employs workers who operate machinery for food packaging. The work is continuous and demanding due to high production volumes. Application: the factory follows Option B, under Section 58, structuring work periods to not exceed 5 hours. Workers are entitled to a minimum of half an hour for rest after each 5-hour shift. Engineering factory. Scenario: an engineering factory in Islamabad has workers involved in precision manufacturing. Their tasks require focus and attention to detail. Application: to ensure worker efficiency and safety, the factory adheres to option A of Section 58. Work periods do not exceed 6 hours, and each worker is granted a minimum 1-hour rest interval during their shift. Case study, Intervals for Rest, Section 58. Factory type, Engineering Factory. Scenario, an engineering factory in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, has adopted a shift system for its workers. It's crucial to ensure that workers have adequate intervals for rest between shifts. Application of Section 58. The factory adheres to Section 58 of the Factory Act, which mandates that periods of work must be arranged to provide workers with appropriate intervals for rest. Compliance. Shift scheduling. The factory schedules shifts in compliance with Section 58, ensuring that workers have intervals for rest based on the nature of their work and the duration of their shifts. Interval monitoring. The factory closely monitors and enforces intervals for rest to prevent worker fatigue. Benefits and outcomes. Worker well-being. Compliance with Section 58 safeguards worker health and well-being by preventing overwork and fatigue. Productivity. Adequate rest intervals contribute to better worker productivity and safety. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 58 may lead to worker exhaustion, reduced productivity, and potential legal consequences if workers' intervals for rest are not adequately provided. Section 59, Spread over. Definition. The periods of work for an adult worker in a factory must be arranged in a way that, along with rest intervals, they do not exceed 10.5 hours in any day. In seasonal factories, this limit can be extended to 11.5 hours with government permission and conditions. Elaboration. This section regulates the total duration of work, including rest intervals, in a day for adult workers in a factory. It sets a standard limit of 10.5 hours but allows for extensions in seasonal factories with government approval. Example: in an automobile factory in Pakistan, workers' schedules are arranged so that their total daily work hours, including breaks, do not exceed 10.5 hours. However, during peak production periods, they may work up to 11.5 hours with government permission. Case study, Spread over, Section 59. Factory type, Automobile factory. Scenario, an automobile manufacturing factory in Karachi, Pakistan, operates with multiple shifts to ensure continuous production. Maintaining a proper spread over of working hours is essential. Application of Section 59. The factory adheres to Section 59 of the Factory Act, arranging shifts and working hours so that they do not spread over more than 10.5 hours in any day. Compliance. Shift planning. The factory meticulously plans shifts to ensure that workers' working hours, along with intervals for rest, do not exceed the specified limits. Government permissions. When necessary, the factory obtains permissions from the government for any deviations from the standard working hour limits. Benefits and outcomes. Continuous production. Proper spread over allows the factory to maintain continuous production while complying with labor regulations. Worker health. Compliance supports worker health by preventing excessively long working hours. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 59 may result in legal repercussions, worker dissatisfaction, and potential disruptions in production due to non-compliance. Section 60. Notice of work periods for adults. Definition 1. Notice of work periods. Notice of work periods. This refers to a document or display in a factory that clearly defines the specific periods during which adult workers may be required to work. Definition 2, Shift System. Shift system. It is a work schedule in which different groups of workers take turns working in the same job or at the same workplace in successive shifts. Explanation of Section 60. Section 60 of the Factory Act emphasizes the importance of providing transparency regarding the work periods for adult workers. It outlines the following key provisions. Subsection 1. Every factory must have a notice of work periods for adult workers displayed and correctly maintained. This notice should clearly indicate the periods during which adult workers may be required to work. Subsection 2. The periods mentioned in the notice must be fixed beforehand, ensuring that they align with the provisions of various sections of the Factory Act, such as Sections 54, 55, 57, 58, and 59. This helps prevent any violation of working hour regulations. Subsection 3. If all adult workers in a factory are required to work within the same periods, the factory manager should generally fix those periods for all workers. Subsection 4. In cases where adult workers in a factory have different work requirements, the manager should classify them into groups based on the nature of their work. Subsection 5. For groups not operating on a shift system, the manager should establish specific work periods within which each group may be required to work. Subsection 6. If a group works on a shift system without predetermined changes, the manager should define the periods within which each relay of the group may be required to work. Subsection 7. For groups with predetermined changes in shifts, the manager should create a scheme of shifts that specifies the work periods for each relay on any given day. Subsection 8. The government may establish rules regarding the format of the notice of work periods for adults and the manner in which it should be maintained. Application in real-world examples. Let's explore how Section 60 is applied in various types of factories in Pakistan. Beverages factory. Scenario: a beverages factory in Faisalabad operates on a shift system to meet production demands. The manager follows subsection 6 of Section 60 to define work periods for each relay of workers within the shift system. Cement factory. Scenario: a cement factory in Karachi has different work requirements for operators and maintenance staff. The manager classifies workers into groups as per subsection 4, and sets work periods accordingly. Case study: Notice of periods for work, Section 60. Factory type: beverages factory. Scenario: a beverages factory in Lahore, Pakistan, operates with various shifts for different groups of workers. Ensuring that workers are aware of their work periods is crucial for smooth operations. Application of Section 60. The factory strictly adheres to Section 60 of the Factory Act by displaying and maintaining notices of periods for work, clearly indicating the periods during which adult workers may be required to work. Compliance. Detailed notices. The factory maintains detailed notices that specify work periods for various groups of workers based on the nature of their work and shifts. Regular updates. Notices are regularly updated to reflect any changes in work schedules or shifts. Benefits and outcomes. Clarity. Workers are well informed about their work periods, promoting clarity and predictability in their schedules. Regulatory compliance. Adhering to Section 60 ensures compliance with labor laws and minimizes disputes regarding work hours. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 60 may lead to worker confusion, disputes over work schedules, and potential legal consequences for non-compliance. Section 61, Copy of Notice of Periods for Work. Definition. A copy of the notice referred to in Section 60 must be sent in duplicate to the inspector within 14 days after the commencement of this act or before the day on which the factory begins work if it starts operations after the act's commencement. Any proposed changes in the system of work that necessitate a change in the notice must also be notified to the inspector. Elaboration. This section ensures transparency and compliance with labor regulations by requiring factories to provide copies of their notices of work periods to the inspector. Any changes to these work schedules must also be communicated and approved. Example: when a new food processing factory opens in Pakistan, it must send a copy of its work schedule to the inspector within 14 days of commencing operations. If they later decide to change their work periods, they must notify the inspector in advance. Case study: compliance with Section 61, sending a copy of the notice of periods for work to the inspector. Factory type: beverage factory. Scenario: a well-established beverage factory located in Karachi, Pakistan, operates round the clock with multiple shifts to meet the high demand for its products. The factory management places a strong emphasis on adherence to labor laws and regulations. Application of Section 61. The beverage factory rigorously follows Section 61 of the Factory Act, which mandates sending a copy of the notice of periods for work to the inspector. Compliance. Timely notification. The factory manager ensures that a copy of the notice of periods for work is sent to the inspector within 14 days after the commencement of the act and before the start of work if the factory begins operations after the act's commencement. Regular updates. Any proposed changes in the system of work that might necessitate alterations to the notice are communicated to the inspector well in advance. The factory provides this notification in duplicate, as required by the Act. Transparent records. The factory maintains a meticulous record-keeping system that includes worker schedules, shifts, and all relevant details regarding the notice of periods for work. Inspector's oversight. The inspector's office receives and reviews the notice promptly. They ensure that the factory complies with labor laws and regulations. If any issues or concerns arise, the inspector communicates with the factory management for resolution. Benefits and outcomes. Legal compliance. The beverage factory's strict adherence to Section 61 ensures legal compliance with labor regulations, promoting a fair and transparent work environment for its employees. Collaborative relationship. Consistent communication with the inspector's office fosters a positive and collaborative relationship between the factory management and regulatory authorities. This partnership facilitates quick resolution of any issues and supports a culture of compliance. Worker satisfaction. Employees at the beverage factory benefit from having their schedules and rest intervals defined in advance. This contributes to higher job satisfaction and overall well-being. Efficient workforce management. By maintaining accurate records and adhering to labor laws, the factory management can efficiently manage its workforce, leading to increased productivity and operational efficiency. Explanation of Section 62. Section 62 of the Factory Act is crucial for maintaining a record of adult workers in a factory. It outlines the following key provisions. Subsection: 1. The manager of every factory is responsible for maintaining a register of adult workers. This register should include the following details. A. Name and age of each adult worker in the factory. B. Nature of the worker's job. C. The group in which the worker is categorized. D. If the group works on shifts, the specific relay to which the worker is assigned. E. Any other particulars as may be prescribed. First provision, if an inspector determines that any muster roll, register, or computerized record maintained as part of the factory's routine already contains the required information, the inspector may order that such records be treated as the register of adult workers. Second provision, in cases where the government is convinced that the conditions of work in a particular factory or class of factories pose no significant risk of violating the Factory Act's provisions, they may exempt that factory or all factories of that class from the requirement of maintaining this register. Subsection 2. The government has the authority to establish rules pertaining to the form of the register of adult workers, the method of maintenance, and the duration for which it must be preserved. Application in real-world examples. Now, let's examine how Section 62 is applied in different types of factories in Pakistan. Textiles factory. Scenario: a textiles factory in Lahore employs hundreds of adult workers. The factory manager, in accordance with Section 62, maintains a detailed register that includes the workers' names, ages, job descriptions, and their respective work groups. This ensures transparency and compliance with labor laws. Chemicals factory. Scenario: a chemicals factory in Karachi operates with multiple shifts, each with its specific group of adult workers. The factory manager diligently maintains a register, following Section 62, which records worker information, their assigned relays, and the nature of their work. Case study: Register of Adult Workers, Section 62. Factory type: textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad, Pakistan, employs a significant number of adult workers across various departments. Maintaining accurate records of workers is essential for compliance with labor laws. Application of Section 62. The factory follows Section 62 of the Factory Act by maintaining a register of adult workers, including details such as names, ages, nature of work, and work groups. Compliance. Accurate record keeping. The factory maintains an up-to-date register that includes all required particulars about each adult worker. Inspector notifications. Any proposed changes in the system of work or registers are notified to the inspector as required by law. Benefits and outcomes. Compliance assurance. Maintaining accurate records ensures compliance with labor regulations and facilitates government inspections. Worker tracking. The register helps in tracking workers' employment history and ensuring their rights are protected. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 62 may result in penalties, complications during inspections, and potential disputes with workers regarding their records. Section 63, Hours of work to correspond with notice. Definition. No adult worker shall be allowed to work in a factory unless their working hours align with the notice of periods for work displayed under Section 60 and the entries made in the Register of Adult Workers under Section 62. Elaboration. This section ensures that the actual working hours of adult workers match the information provided in the factory's notice and register. It prevents discrepancies between schedules and actual work hours. Example: in a beverage factory in Pakistan, the working hours of adult workers are closely monitored to ensure they align with the notice and register. Any deviations are corrected to maintain compliance. Case study: hours of work corresponding with notice, Section 63. Factory type: chemical factory. Scenario: a chemical factory in Karachi, Pakistan, operates with various shifts and workgroups. It is essential to ensure that workers' actual working hours correspond to the notice of work periods. Application of Section 63. The factory strictly adheres to Section 63 by ensuring that no adult worker is allowed to work unless their actual hours correspond with the notice of work periods. Compliance. Regular audits. The factory conducts regular audits and inspections to verify that workers' actual hours align with the posted notice. Immediate corrections. Any discrepancies found are promptly corrected to ensure compliance with the Factory Act. Benefits and outcomes. Regulatory adherence. Compliance with Section 63 demonstrates the factory's commitment to upholding labor laws and ensures workers' rights are protected. Efficient operations. Aligning actual working hours with the notice improves operational efficiency and reduces potential disputes. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 63 may lead to legal consequences, worker dissatisfaction, and disruptions in production due to non-compliance. Section 64. Powers to make rules and exemptions. Definition 1. Supervision or management positions. Supervision or management positions. This term refers to roles within a factory that involve overseeing or managing workers or specific functions. These positions are crucial for the efficient operation of the factory. Definition 2. Urgent repairs. Urgent repairs. This refers to immediate repairs or maintenance work required in a factory to address critical issues that may disrupt operations or pose safety risks. Definition 3. Preparatory or complementary work. Preparatory or complementary work. This category includes tasks that are necessary for the smooth functioning of the factory but are carried out outside the regular working hours. Definition 4. Intermittent work. Intermittent work. This involves work where employees have irregular intervals during which they are not actively working while still on duty. These intervals typically exceed the rest intervals required by law. Definition 5. Continuous work. Continuous work. This term describes work processes that must operate uninterrupted throughout the day due to technical or operational reasons. Definition 6. Articles of prime necessity. Articles of prime necessity. These are essential goods that must be produced or supplied daily to meet immediate consumer needs. Explanation of Section 64. Section 64 outlines the authority of the government to create rules and grant exemptions in specific situations within factories. It encompasses several aspects. Supervision and management. Certain sections of the Factory Act do not apply to individuals holding positions of supervision or management. These positions are critical for the factory's effective functioning. Exemptions. The government can formulate rules that allow exemptions for workers engaged in various scenarios such as urgent repairs, preparatory or complementary work, intermittent work, continuous work, production of articles of prime necessity, fixed-season manufacturing processes, and work dependent on natural forces. Maximum limits. When creating rules, the government must establish maximum limits for weekly work hours for all classes of workers. Any exemption granted must adhere to these limits. Time frame. Rules made under this section have a maximum validity of 3 years. Application in real-world examples. Now, let's explore how Section 64 is applied in various types of factories in Pakistan. Textiles factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad, Pakistan, has a team of supervisors who oversee the production floor. These supervisors often work longer hours to manage shifts effectively. Application: the provisions of the Factory Act that apply to regular workers may not apply to these supervisors, recognizing their crucial roles in maintaining smooth operations. Chemical factory. Scenario: a chemical factory in Karachi, Pakistan, requires continuous monitoring and maintenance due to the nature of its processes. Application: the government may create rules exempting workers engaged in continuous work from certain provisions of the Factory Act, considering the technical necessity of uninterrupted operations. Example: in an engineering factory in Pakistan, workers engaged in urgent repair work may be exempt from some restrictions on working hours, as long as they meet the conditions outlined in the rules created by the government. Case study: Powers to make rules, exempting from restrictions, Section 64. Factory type: automobile factory. Scenario: an automobile manufacturing factory in Karachi, Pakistan, occasionally requires workers to engage in urgent repairs beyond the standard working hours. They seek exemptions from certain labor restrictions under Section 64. Application of Section 64. The factory complies with Section 64 by seeking exemptions, as needed, for workers engaged in urgent repairs, aligning with the provisions of this section. Compliance. Exemption requests. The factory follows the proper procedure for requesting exemptions and notifies the relevant authorities. Rule adherence. The factory strictly adheres to the rules and conditions set forth in exemptions, ensuring that they align with labor laws. Benefits and outcomes. Operational flexibility. Exemptions enable the factory to address urgent repair needs promptly, reducing downtime and maintaining production schedules. Regulatory compliance. Complying with Section 64 allows the factory to navigate exceptional work situations while adhering to labor laws. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 64 may result in legal consequences, delays in urgent repairs, and potential disputes over labor restrictions. Section 65. Power to make orders exempting from restrictions. Definition: exceptional pressure of work. Exceptional pressure of work. This term refers to situations in factories where there is an urgent need for additional labor due to unexpected demands or circumstances. Explanation of Section 65. Section 65 of the Factory Act focuses on the government's ability to make orders to exempt workers from specific provisions of the Act when certain conditions are met. Subsection 1. When the government is convinced that demanding fixed periods of work in advance is unreasonable due to the nature of work or other circumstances, it has the authority to relax or modify the provisions of Sections 60 and 61. This is done to ensure better control over work periods and conditions. Subsection 2. The government or, under its control, the chief inspector, can issue written orders to exempt adult workers in a factory, group of factories, or specific class of factories from any or all provisions of Sections 54, 55, 57, 58, 59, 60, and 61. These exemptions are granted on the grounds that the factory or factories are facing exceptional pressure of work. Subsection 3. Any exemption granted under subsection 2, regarding weekly work hours must adhere to the maximum limits set under section 64(4). Subsection 4. Orders issued under subsection 2 have a specified duration, which should not exceed 2 months from the date of notification to the factory manager. However, if the government deems it in the public interest, it may extend the operation of these orders for periods not exceeding 6 months at any one time, as specified in an official notification. Application in real-world examples. Let's explore how Section 65 is applied in practical scenarios within different types of factories in Pakistan. Food processing factory. Scenario: a food processing factory in Lahore experiences a sudden surge in demand for its products during the holiday season. The government, recognizing the exceptional pressure of work, issues an order under Section 65. This allows the factory to temporarily modify the work hours of adult workers to meet the increased production demands while ensuring that workers' rights are upheld within the prescribed limits. Textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad receives a substantial export order with a tight deadline. To cope with this exceptional workload, the chief inspector, subject to government control, issues an exemption order under Section 65. This permits the factory to extend work hours for a limited period, ensuring timely completion of the order without compromising the well-being of the workers. Case study: powers to make orders exempting from restrictions, Section 65. Factory type: textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad, Pakistan, occasionally faces exceptional pressure of work due to seasonal demands. They need to seek exemptions from certain labor restrictions under Section 65. Application of Section 65. The factory complies with Section 65 by seeking orders exempting them from specific labor restrictions during periods of exceptional work pressure. Compliance. Government approvals. The factory obtains necessary approvals and orders from the government when seeking exemptions due to exceptional work pressure. Strict conditions. The factory adheres to any conditions and limitations imposed by the government in the exemption orders. Benefits and outcomes. Meeting demands. Exemptions under Section 65 enable the factory to efficiently manage exceptional workloads during peak seasons. Regulatory adherence. The factory complies with labor laws while addressing the demands of seasonal production. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 65 may result in legal consequences, difficulties in managing peak workloads, and potential disputes over labor restrictions. Section 66. Further restrictions on the employment of women. Explanation of Section 66. Section 66 of the Factory Act outlines additional restrictions concerning the employment of women in factories. These restrictions are essential to protect the rights and safety of female workers. Subsection 1. This subsection imposes two primary restrictions. No exemption from the provisions of Section 57, regarding weekly hours of work, may be granted in respect of any woman worker. Women shall be allowed to work in a factory only between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. However, if the employer provides transport facilities that drop female workers at their doorstep or the nearest possible place, they may work up to 10 p.m. in 2 shifts. Provisos. The government has the authority to vary the working hours in the case of specific classes of factories, allowing women to work for longer hours if needed. This can extend to a span of 10.5 hours or, for seasonal factories, 11.5 hours between 6 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. The government can also make rules for seasonal factories, defining specific periods during which women may work, as long as these periods collectively amount to at least 10 hours within the span defined in Clause B, or the above proviso. Subsection 2. This subsection allows the government to make rules for exempting women working in fish curing or fish canning factories from the above restrictions. Such exemptions can be made to prevent damage to or deterioration in any raw materials. Subsection 3. Rules made under subsection 2 have a maximum validity of 3 years. Application in real-world examples. Let's explore how Section 66 is applied in practical scenarios within different types of factories in Pakistan. Textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Karachi employs a significant number of female workers. To ensure their safety and well-being, the factory strictly adheres to the working hours specified in Section 66, 1b. Female workers are provided with transport facilities, enabling them to work extended hours during peak production periods. This arrangement ensures compliance with the law while accommodating the needs of the factory and its workers. Fish canning factory. Scenario: a fish canning factory in Gwadar operates in a remote location and relies on female workers for various critical processes. During certain seasons when fish supply is abundant, the factory applies for an exemption under Section 66, 2. The government grants the exemption to prevent fish spoilage, allowing female workers to work beyond the standard hours temporarily. Case study: further restrictions on employment of women, Section 66. Factory type: engineering factory. Scenario: an engineering factory in Islamabad, Pakistan, employs female workers and must adhere to the additional restrictions placed on the employment of women under Section 66. Application of Section 66. The factory complies with Section 66 by ensuring that no exemption is granted in respect of any woman from the provisions of Section 57. Additionally, female workers are scheduled between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., adhering to the time limits specified in the Act. Compliance. Shift scheduling. The factory schedules female workers' shifts between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. to meet the legal requirements. No exemptions. The factory does not seek exemptions for female workers from Section 57 and adheres to its provisions. Benefits and outcomes. Legal compliance. Following Section 66 ensures the factory complies with regulations and avoids potential legal issues. Worker safety. Scheduling female workers within specified hours enhances their safety and well-being. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 66 can lead to legal consequences and concerns for the safety of female workers if they are scheduled outside the allowed hours. Section 67, Special Provision for Night Shifts. Definition 1, Shift Extension. Shift extension. This section pertains to situations where a worker's shift extends over midnight. It provides guidelines on how to treat the ensuing day for that worker. Definition 2, Ensuing Day. Ensuing day. In the context of Section 67, the ensuing day refers to the period following the completion of a night shift that extends beyond midnight. Explanation of Section 67. Section 67 essentially outlines how to calculate and consider the day for a worker who works a night shift that spans midnight. It specifies that, by default, the ensuing day for the worker shall be the 24-hour period beginning when the night shift ends. In this case, the hours worked after midnight are counted towards the previous day. However, it also allows for government intervention. The government can issue written orders designating the ensuing day as the 24-hour period starting when the night shift begins. In this scenario, the hours worked before midnight are counted towards the ensuing day. Real-world examples and conceptual elaboration. Let's explore real examples from different types of factories in Pakistan to conceptualize Section 67. Food processing factory. Scenario: a food processing factory in Karachi operates night shifts. A worker's shift starts at 10 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. Application: by default, the ensuing day for this worker is from 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. The hours worked from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., midnight, count toward the previous day. Government intervention: however, the government may issue orders for another factory, perhaps one dealing with perishable goods, where the ensuing day starts at 10 p.m. In this case, the hours worked from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. count toward the ensuing day. Chemical factory. Scenario: a chemical factory in Lahore operates night shifts. A worker's shift starts at 8 p.m. and ends at 8 a.m. Application: by default, the ensuing day for this worker is from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. The hours worked from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m., midnight, count toward the previous day. Government intervention: the government may issue orders for a different chemical factory, allowing the ensuing day to start at 8 p.m. Here, the hours worked from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. count toward the ensuing day. Case study: special provision for night shifts, Section 67. Factory type: cement factory. Scenario: a cement factory in Lahore, Pakistan, operates with night shifts that extend over midnight. Ensuring proper treatment of the ensuing day for workers on night shifts is vital. Application of Section 67. The factory complies with Section 67 by deeming the ensuing day for night shift workers as the period of 24 hours beginning when their shift ends. This ensures proper rest and compensation. Compliance. Shift treatment. The factory's policy treats the ensuing day for night shift workers as specified in Section 67, ensuring they receive adequate rest. Compensation. Workers who work past midnight are compensated according to labor laws. Benefits and outcomes. Worker rest. Complying with Section 67 provides night shift workers with appropriate rest, contributing to their well-being and job satisfaction. Regulatory adherence. The factory's practices align with labor laws, minimizing disputes and potential violations. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 67 may result in worker dissatisfaction, potential legal issues, and non-compliance with labor regulations. Section 68, extra pay for overtime work. Definitions. Before we delve into the section, let's clarify a key term. Piece rate basis, a method of wage payment where workers are paid based on the quantity of work or pieces they produce, rather than hourly wages. Explanation of Section 68. Section 68 of the Factory Act outlines the rules regarding extra pay for overtime work by factory workers. Subsection 1. This subsection specifies the conditions under which a worker is entitled to overtime pay. It distinguishes between non-seasonal and seasonal factories. In a non-seasonal factory, if a worker works for more than 9 hours in any day or for more than 48 hours in any week, they shall be entitled to overtime pay at a rate twice their ordinary rate of pay. In a seasonal factory, if a worker works for more than 10 hours in any day or for more than 50 hours in any week, they shall also be entitled to overtime pay at a rate twice their ordinary rate of pay. Explanation: the ordinary rate of pay is defined as the total remuneration expressed in monetary terms that would be payable to a worker if the terms of the employment contract, whether express or implied, were fully met. This excludes certain non-monetary benefits such as house accommodation, medical care, or pension contributions. Subsection 2. This subsection deals with workers who are paid on a piece rate basis. In such cases, the government, in consultation with the relevant industry, may establish time-based rates that are as close as possible to the average earnings of piece rate workers. These fixed rates will be considered the ordinary rates for calculating overtime pay. Subsection 3. This subsection authorizes the government to prescribe the registers that factories must maintain to ensure compliance with the provisions of this section. These registers help monitor and record overtime work and corresponding payments. Application in real-world examples. Let's explore how Section 68 is applied in practical scenarios within different types of factories in Pakistan. Textile factory. Scenario: in a textile factory in Faisalabad, non-seasonal workers occasionally need to work extended hours to meet production deadlines. If a worker exceeds 9 hours in a day or 48 hours in a week, they are entitled to overtime pay at double their ordinary rate of pay. This additional compensation incentivizes workers to contribute to the factory's productivity without being overworked. Construction industry. Scenario: in the construction industry, workers are often paid on a piece rate basis, where their earnings depend on the amount of work completed. The government, in consultation with industry stakeholders, has established time-based rates equivalent to the average earnings of piece rate workers. This ensures that construction laborers are fairly compensated when they work overtime. Case study: extra pay for overtime, Section 68. Factory type: automobile factory. Scenario: an automobile manufacturing factory in Karachi, Pakistan, occasionally requires workers to put in extra hours beyond the standard workday. Application of Section 68. The factory complies with Section 68 by providing extra pay to workers who exceed the standard working hours. They pay these workers at twice their ordinary rate of pay for overtime. Compliance. Overtime tracking. The factory accurately tracks overtime hours worked by employees. Overtime compensation. Workers who exceed standard hours receive compensation at the rate mandated by Section 68. Benefits and outcomes. Fair compensation. Providing extra pay for overtime encourages workers to put in additional hours when needed. Regulatory adherence. Compliance with Section 68 upholds labor laws and ensures workers are compensated fairly for their extra effort. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 68 may lead to worker dissatisfaction, potential legal consequences, and disputes over fair compensation. Case study: obligation to work overtime, Section 69. Factory type, textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad, Pakistan, occasionally faces unexpected surges in demand, necessitating overtime work. Section 69, obligation to work overtime. Definition: adult workers may be required to work overtime, provided that such overtime work conforms to the provisions of this Act and the rules made thereunder. Elaboration: this section allows factories to require adult workers to work overtime when necessary, but it emphasizes that such overtime must comply with the labor laws and regulations set forth in this Act. Example: in a food processing factory in Pakistan, if an unexpected rush order comes in, workers may be required to work overtime to meet the production deadline while adhering to the provisions of this Act. Case study: obligation to work overtime, Section 69. Factory type, textile factory. Scenario: a textile factory in Faisalabad, Pakistan, occasionally faces unexpected surges in demand, necessitating overtime work. Application of Section 69. The factory complies with Section 69 by requiring workers to work overtime when necessary, provided that such overtime conforms to the provisions of the Factory Act and associated rules. Compliance. Overtime policy. The factory has a clear policy outlining the conditions and compensation for mandatory overtime work. Regulatory adherence. Overtime work is only required and it conforms to the Factory Act and associated rules. Benefits and outcomes. Demand flexibility. Requiring overtime allows the factory to meet surges in demand and maintain customer satisfaction. Regulatory compliance. Adhering to Section 69 ensures compliance with labor laws and worker protection. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 69 may result in legal consequences, worker dissatisfaction, and potential disputes if overtime work is not conducted in compliance with labor regulations. Section 70. Restriction on double employment. Definition: no adult worker shall be allowed to work in any factory on any day on which they have already been working in any other factory, except under prescribed circumstances. Elaboration. This section prevents adult workers from engaging in double employment within the same day, ensuring that they have adequate rest between shifts in different factories, except when specific circumstances are met as prescribed by law. Example: an adult worker in a beverage factory in Pakistan cannot work in another factory on the same day, except when approved by relevant regulations or exceptional situations occur. Case study: restriction on double employment, Section 70. Factory type, chemical factory. Scenario: a chemical factory in Islamabad, Pakistan, employs adult workers who occasionally seek employment in other factories. Ensuring compliance with Section 70 is necessary to prevent double employment. Application of Section 70. The factory complies with Section 70 by adhering to the restrictions on adult workers' double employment as specified in the Factory Act. Compliance. Double employment monitoring. The factory routinely monitors and communicates with workers to identify instances of double employment. Worker education. Workers are educated about the legal restrictions on double employment to prevent violations. Benefits and outcomes. Legal compliance. Complying with Section 70 prevents double employment violations, protecting both workers and the factory from potential legal consequences. Workplace stability. preventing double employment contributes to workplace stability and prevents worker fatigue. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 70 may lead to legal repercussions for the factory and potential work-related issues for the employees involved in double employment. Section 71, Control of overlapping shifts. Definition. Government can make rules to control overlapping shifts in factories, ensuring that more than one relay of workers is not engaged in the same kind of work at the same time, except with government permission and conditions. Elaboration. This section grants the government the authority to regulate overlapping shifts in factories, preventing multiple shifts of workers from engaging in the same work simultaneously unless specific conditions and permissions are met. Example: in an automobile factory in Pakistan, government rules ensure that only one group of workers is engaged in welding tasks at any given time to maintain safety and efficiency. Case study: Control of overlapping shifts, Section 71. Factory type: food processing factory. Scenario: a food processing factory in Lahore, Pakistan, operates multiple shifts and wants to avoid overlapping shifts in accordance with Section 71. Application of Section 71. The factory complies with Section 71 by ensuring that no more than one relay of workers is engaged in the same kind of work at the same time, except with the permission of the government and subject to specified conditions. Compliance. Shift coordination. The factory carefully coordinates and schedules shifts to prevent overlap. Government permissions. When necessary, the factory obtains government permissions for overlapping shifts, adhering to specified conditions. Benefits and outcomes. Regulatory adherence. Complying with Section 71 ensures that the factory operates within legal limits and avoids potential violations. Efficient operations. Proper shift coordination minimizes the risk of confusion and accidents during overlapping shifts. Disadvantages in case of violations. Violating Section 71 may result in legal consequences, operational inefficiencies, and potential safety hazards due to overlapping work. These provisions and definitions within Chapter 4 of the Act are crucial for protecting the rights and well-being of adult workers in factories in Pakistan. They help ensure reasonable working hours, rest intervals, fair compensation for overtime, and compliance with labor regulations. Real-life examples and case studies from various industries in Pakistan illustrate how these regulations are applied and enforced in practice.